So we have Emma Stratton. Emma, if you're around, please join me on the stage here. And we're going to keep on the topic of messaging. And Emma's going to talk about how to unmuddy the messaging. Hello, Emma.
Hey, Pep, how's it going?
I'm kicking ass. All right. Let's see. Can you share your slides?
Yes.
Let's make sure the tech is working. All right. So I'll join you later for Q&A. Peace.
All right. Awesome. Thank you, Pep. Hey, everyone. It is so good to kind of see you. Thank you for joining me today on my talk, Unmuddy Your Messaging. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Emma Stratton, and I'm the founder of Punchy. I'm a consultant who works with software companies and really help them convey the awesomeness of their technology through positioning and messaging strategy. So I do a couple things. On the one hand, I work alongside product marketing teams, leadership of high growth B2B tech companies to help them position their products for growth and create messaging strategies that really help them stand out in super crowded markets. Ton of fun, work with great companies across lots of industries. And on the other hand, I teach product marketers how to do awesome messaging strategies. We have a course and we train marketers on how to go from start to finish to create clear, compelling messaging. And through it all, quite frankly, I have spent way too much time thinking about messaging, like zillions and zillions of hours thinking about messaging. Why is it hard? Why is it hard for companies? Why is it hard for people? How can we be more clear? Pep talks about clarity. Clarity is everything. And unclear messaging is why I got into this whole messaging game to begin with some 10 years ago. Sentences like this, right? Messages like this in the middle of the screen where you read it a couple times and you're still, not really sure what it's saying, right? You're not really sure what it's saying. It is just unclear. And so what I've really found over the years is that unclear messaging and B2B tech, it's a match made in heaven. They really, really go hand in hand. And I think it's because teams are trying really hard to explain complicated technology. They're trying to explain, really tiny points of differentiation. They're trying to explain why it's better than like zillions of other, solutions in the market. And it just creates a lot of words. And a lot of these words are confusing people. They're confusing prospects. They're confusing customers. All of these words are like mud that are smothering the value of your product. So I went for a really overboard metaphor here with the mud, but it's true. Unclear messaging really kind of hides and covers up the awesomeness of your product or your solution or your company. So basically, you can legit have the best product in the world, but if you have a muddy message on top of it that is not clear, people will not recognize that bestness of your product. They will not see it because it will be unclear. There's a flip side to that. You can have a completely mediocre, humdrum product. And if you have a crystal clear, compelling message for that, people will think it's the best. So either way, whether you're marketing the best products in the world or a totally mediocre one, you really want to make the awesomeness, the value clear to people. You want to avoid the mud. So why does muddy messaging happen to good people, smart people? I mean, I am lucky to be friends with lots of marketers and founders, and these are some of the smartest people I've ever met, and yet they struggle with clarity. And why is that? Why is this such, an epidemic? It's because it is not easy to be clear. So clear messaging is really deceptive. You read it and you're like, oh God, that probably took 2 seconds to write. But it didn't. Clear messaging takes time. I believe that most of us default at complexity. I think that's where most of us start. We make things more complicated. And then it takes time. It takes skill and effort to kind of prune it back and make yourself clear. And which brings me to my second point, like you didn't learn this in school. None of us learn this in school. In fact, a lot of the stuff we learned in English class is kind of getting in the way. We need to unlearn a few things. And then, there's only a few people who are kind of out there now teaching actual craft of messaging. Most of us just kind of work, figure it out on the job. We're lucky to have a mentor and we kind of figure it out. So that's why I'm really passionate about teaching and giving easy, simple, practical tips that anyone can do to add clarity to messaging. I don't believe you need to be some like Hemingway or some amazing creative genius to write clear messaging. There are some tips and just techniques you need to follow. So today I really wanted to give you some things you can do today to get more clear, whether that's in your own writing or whether you're giving feedback to other folks on your team. I want to give you real things you can get out there and do right now. So I'm going to talk about the 3 most common ways I believe we muddy up our messaging in B2B tech. I'm going to talk about really specific things to look for in your writing that relates to these muddy things. And then I'm going to give you some easy tips to clarify those things. And I'll give you some examples so you know what I'm talking about. All right. So the first reason, okay, muddy messaging, the first thing that muddies it up is we make it all about our product and not about our customer. I love this picture. Okay, so much messaging comes from this perspective where our technology is the hero of the story and not the customer. And it makes sense because we're all desperate to show the power, the robustness, the possibility, the strength of our platforms. We're trying really, really hard to get that across as quickly as possible. But you end up with kind of messaging like this that is just all about what the platform can do. And it kind of over rotates and goes a little bit too far, where everything is focused on, okay, how can I explain how awesome this product is and how powerful it is really quickly? And in that effort, the customer and their needs sort of gets edged out of the screen, right? So this is a headline value prop of a company, and it's all about the platform. I'm not really seeing the customer. So why is this a problem? Okay. Have you ever been in a situation where a friend or a colleague is like, oh my God, I had this dream last night. Can I tell you about it? And then they start explaining for like 5 to 10 minutes about this like wild dream they had last night that has nothing to do with you. I find that so boring. I just like zone out because it has nothing to do with me. And then this wacky dream like makes no sense. And I'm trying to kind of like track along with this like insane dream that they had last night. That is what I believe it's like for prospects reading messaging that is all about your tech and nothing to do with them. It's not interesting. It has nothing to do with them, so they don't care. And it's also like really hard to understand and track along with it, because how are they supposed to understand this like huge platform in a couple messages? So that I think is the number one issue. But then if your reader does stick with you, say they're really committed to kind of getting some solutions and putting some people on a short list, you're making them do all the work. It's on the reader to kind of like, okay, what does that mean to me? Like, how would this apply to my life, right? You're actually making the reader do the work that your messaging is meant to do, which is to show them quickly why this product could matter to them and how it could help them. So how do we spot it? So, you look for messaging that quite simply is just focused on all the things the product can do and not all the things a customer can do thanks to your product. And in really extreme cases, the actual human will be completely removed from the sentence. So there won't even be a you or a customer or sales teams can. It will just go straight from tech to some kind of outcome. So this example on the right, it comes from an enterprise company, but see how it goes straight from like, our cloud native platform unlocks like amazingness at your enterprise. And there's really no person there. It's basically saying, hey, install this software and like all your problems are going to be solved, which we know is not the case, right? People are involved here, and but the person is out of the equation. So how do you clear this up? Well, you just want to make sure that you're always focused on showing people what they can do. They're the hero of the story. What are the new superpowers they will have thanks to your product? That needs to be the focus of your messaging. And while you're crafting that, you want to weave in pains or desires that matter to them. So let me give you a real life example. Well, I made this up, but just so you can see what I'm talking about. So here's a before example of technology as hero. It's a budgeting tool. And see, it's going straight from like AI powered tool, does this, that, or the other. And I read that, I'm like, great. It's like someone's dream, right? I'm like, I don't really know why I should care about this. So now let's switch the focus onto what a person can do with this tool and weave in some of their pains and desires. So the after here looks really different. Take the fear out of checking your bank account with a budgeting tool that shows your current cash flow so you know what you can and can't afford. So it is really talking about Here's what you can do now with this tool. It leads with a pain worth solving, which is that horrible feeling of going into your balance and realizing you have $0. And it also ends with a nice desire, sort of being in control of your finances and knowing what you can afford. They look really different, right? Because this is really about translation. You really need to translate your technology into what this means and why it matters to your customer. So the after message is often going to look quite different. Okay, so the second way that we muddy our messaging, and this is one of my favorite, is trying to say, excuse me, everything to everyone. So when I start working with consulting with teams, a lot of times they will give me old messaging frameworks, or they'll give me their command of the message documents, and I will be shocked by how much stuff is in there. Like, the messaging framework is often bursting at the seams with words, with messages. And I'm sure a lot of you could probably relate when you're trying to come up with a messaging strategy for your company. You've got a bunch of people in the room and you're trying to kind of land on, this is what we're going to say. Lots of things you want to, you want to fit one more thing, and you want to add a few things. You get this message, and then someone across the room is like, what about scalability? And then someone else is like, wait, we got to talk about efficiency too. And so we squeeze one more thing in, one more thing in, one more thing in, and we keep putting things in. And we end up with too many things. And, I believe this comes from this sort of human emotion, this feeling that we all have, this fear of missing out features, or FOMO, as I call it. And it's just being afraid that we're going to miss something that's really important to someone. It's just like, we don't want to do it as marketers. It's a terrifying thing. So the instinct is often to just put it all in so that we capture everyone. But, I'm sure you've heard that when you speak to everyone, you kind of speak to no one. But actually, I'm just going to talk about it on a very basic level here. When you have too much stuff in a messaging framework, or even kind of on a website, too much messaging, the first thing is it's overwhelming for the reader. So it gives your reader an emotional reaction of like anxiety, or just like, no, I can't. It's overwhelming. It's too much. The next problem is when you have too many things on the page, it is instantly forgettable. I bet none of you could list 3 things that were on that last slide because it was too overwhelming. So it's hard to remember what you are reading or what you saw. And then finally, there's absolutely no, this is the opposite of differentiation. Differentiation is all about, putting a stake in the ground and sacrificing a whole bunch of other things so one specific thing can really shine. That is differentiation. And when you put everything there, it is impossible to differentiate. It's impossible to stand out. So how do you spot it? So this is a very easy one to spot, right? And it's too many commas, too many words, too many ideas, right? They're all related, but these are all things to look for. And I have a real life example on the right that is actually pulled from an old an old messaging framework, excuse me. And so, it's overwhelming. It's a lot, but there's just so many things covered here, right? There's seamlessness, there's data, there's relationships, there's trust, there's so many ideas here linked together through many commas and many words. And it's too much. Someone has tried to say it all in one sentence, but there is no impact. So how do you clear it up? We clear it up with one of my favorite things, which is your SMIT, or your single most important takeaway. So single most important takeaway is the core idea. It is asking yourself, if my reader could only remember one thing, which is true, but if my reader could only remember one thing, what would I want it to be? That is your single most important takeaway. And then you want to refocus the message so it highlights the single most important takeaway, and all the other distracting stuff is deleted. Single most important takeaway is such an awesome tool because it works for everything. It works for a sentence. It works for a message. It works for, a paragraph. It works for a slide on a slide deck. It works for kind of anything. It's really something you want to always think about when you're communicating anything to anyone. What is the single most important takeaway? Because remember, I said before, we default at complexity. Getting clarity is staying true to the single most important thing. So here is an example of a project management software. So On the left, a lot of stuff about the predictive intelligence, and we're talking about risk mitigation, decision-making, customer satisfaction. There's just a lot of stuff here. So if you think, okay, I'm messaging a project management software and it has this cool predictive intelligence, what's the most important takeaway, right? What do I want my customers to know? So we focus that message around the value of this predictive piece. And it's about getting a prediction so you can take the right action early and keep projects from going off the rails. That's really what we need to talk about. So all those other ideas, if they are important, maybe they'll be in separate messages, but I want you to just be ruthless with your single most important takeaway, because that is when you're going to start to actually connect and reach people. So the third way that we muddy our messaging broadly in B2B tech is vague words that sound really good, but say nothing. Okay, so these phrases, I've pulled them from the interwebs. And this is something I talk about a lot with my students, my product marketers. There's this weird phenomena that happens where our fingers on the keyboard are like disconnected with like our mouth, like the way we talk. And so when we're sitting down to write messaging, this kind of stuff just flows out of our fingertips. It just like comes on the keyboard, and this stuff just comes out like smooth like butter. It's just reflexive. But if you were at a barbecue with some colleagues and you were kind of talking about your, product, I'm sure you wouldn't say, oh, it really helps people innovate with action-based strategies. You would never say that. You would probably say it in a, more casual, everyday way. But there's something about when we're typing, these things just naturally flow. And I do believe it's because we're just under the influence of it. I hate jargon, and I still use it sometimes in conversation, and I'm like anti-jargon. There is just so much of it around us, even in our own teams and our own organizations, in the internet. The osmosis, we can't get away from it. It is like, it gets into our system. So it often comes out reflexively, but you really want to just kind of go back and think, does this make sense? Is this clear? Here is another value proposition that just has me scratching my head as to what they're talking about, right? And this is the top of their website. This is kind of like their lead statement, and I don't understand what it's saying. So it's a problem because these things are just hard to grasp. You sound like everyone else, but they are also very easy to misinterpret. So vague language, abstract notions, the real problem here is they are not linked to anything specific. They are vague. So let me just give you an example here about kind of abstract language. Real-time visibility is an abstract notion. Now, it's so overused in the space that we believe it's a benefit in itself. And many technical people will argue this point with me, but it's actually an abstract notion. And when I ask you to picture real-time visibility in your brain, you'd have a hard time coming up with a picture of something. And if you did, what you thought of would probably be different from what I thought of and what another person pictured in their head. So it's very, very slippery. What we want to do is move away from the vagueness and come up with a concrete, specific example of what we mean by that thing. So if we were talking about real-time visibility for, say, a financial platform, this would be a better option because it would be concrete. We would say something like, get a clear view across your financials. That is what real-time visibility would concretely, specifically mean to a customer. And with this kind of statement, you can picture it. It's like, oh, I picture a person with a clear view of their financials looking at a screen. So that message on the right, the specificity there is much more powerful, and it's not up to interpretation like the message on the left. So how do we spot the vague stuff? You look for the jargon, those long, important sounding words, and anything that's really hard to picture in your mind, kind of like this example on the right. You clear it up by being specific, not general, about what that actually means to the customer. What does it look like in their life? What does it mean? And then say it like you would at a barbecue. So how would you explain this to a smart friend? How would you explain it in everyday conversation? Rory mentioned this in the last talk. I often find that when marketers kind of just explain to me what they're trying to say, I always say, write that down. That's much clearer, right? Write that down. So say it like you would at a barbecue. And so final example here of an RFP software, we've got some jargon, transform and accelerate, right? How many times have we seen that? Transform your process with AI-powered smart automation. I'm like, okay, great. I don't understand what smart automation is, right? You're none the wiser as to what this thing is actually going to do for you. So an after example would be getting very specific, right, on this feature. Smart automation fills in the answers for you so you don't have to copy and paste from past RFPs, helping you to finish sooner. Very clear, right? I can picture something auto-filling, and it's very clear what smart automation means. Now, this is a longer message than the one you just saw, and that's fine too. Sometimes your message actually has to get a bit longer to be more clear. That's kind of a nuanced thing, but it's not always that you're trying to say the least, using a vague word just to kind of cut down word count is not worth it, right? Because you're not being clear. So if you got to use a couple extra words to be clear and specific, do so. So that's really the talk. If you only remember 3 things, you might only remember 1, but just remember to show what people can do thanks to your product. Focus on them. Focus on the single most important takeaway, your SMIT, always, 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 and be specific, not vague. And thank you so much. And definitely sign up for my newsletter if you want more tips like this.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you for this supercharged, agile, transforming slide thing. Yeah, awesome.
Groundbreaking, right? Game changing.
Game changing. Totally.
Yes.
Yeah. Anyways. So jargon is a problem. And then when I look at winter messaging tests, I mean, that's the #1 thing is like people read everything and they still don't get it. That's when you have a problem. And so in the questions, John is asking here, so as a freelance writer, I run into this all the time. And my clients want me to use jargon, buzzwords, and approved phrases that nobody understands. What do you do?
Oh my God, approved phrases.
I've never heard that, but it makes sense, right?
Yeah. So what I like to do is have people experience it for themselves. So what I would do is show some jargon from other industries and say, can you tell me what this means? And it's very easy to make fun of jargon when it's other people, other companies, other industries. And it's also very obvious that you don't know what it's talking about, that you're an outsider. And then I would say, that's how our prospects feel when they read our work. They don't understand it. And one of my favorite things to talk about is the curse of knowledge, which I read about in Made to Stick. And the curse of knowledge is a cognitive bias where when we are experts and know everything about something, it is impossible for us to know what it's like to not have all this knowledge. And so we often talk about things way more complicated than we need to, and people just do not get it. So I would just do the whole go to another industry. Do you get it? That's how our customers feel, and let them feel that.
And so Georgia is asking a very similar question. It's like, if somebody is advocating for complex terminology in the business, so how do you do the pushback? So same advice, or would you add anything here?
I know it is hard. I will say it is hard when leadership and certain people are not budging. That is an uphill climb. I mean, one, you could do some message testing with Winter, a lot of time these people are data driven. And so if you've got some data that says people don't even know what we're talking about here, that could be a really good thing to do. Another thing, it's hard. A client just said to me the other day, we were helping them with their messaging, and he said, up until this point, it's like people weren't smart enough to buy us. And that's a bad thing. It's holding our growth back. That's pretty ballsy to say, but maybe it is saying that talk to your salespeople. Can you get some kind of intel from the own company about things that are just going over people's heads, things that are not landing, things that just people are not understanding? Because at the crux of it is jargon is exclusionary. It leaves people out. It makes people feel dumb. And it makes your company look like this kind of all-knowing snob, quite frankly. It's not a good look. I don't know if you can say any of that to your
Mm.
teammates, but send them my way and I'll tell them.
Yeah. And I agree with you about the point of data where most people are rational actors. I mean, every now and then there's somebody who is just overly emotional, whatever, has issues. But most leadership people in leadership roles are rational actors. And when they see evidence that the message is not working, they don't get it, and clarity is, the most important part, as you said, they will change their mind. Especially if we rewrite, write a simpler version and show like how much better this works. And of course, if you have enough traffic and sign up volume to run an A/B test and get more evidence. Edsel is saying, related to George's question, how do you find the balance between communicating the right nuance of the jargon versus dumbing it down too much for the buyers who might be more technical?
Yeah. I hear this a lot. People are like, but my buyer's really technical. So first, I just want to say, just be sure. So a lot of times I'm talking about high level messaging. So we're speaking to a buying group in most cases, unless you're talking about persona specific messaging framework. But a lot of times we need to acknowledge that we're writing for a group of personas at that highest level. And it needs to, yes, be both credible for the practitioner, but also, the business buyer has to kind of understand as well. So simplicity is not about dumbing anything down. Okay. It's not about dumbing things down. It is about focusing only on the things that matter to your customer and conveying that in plain English. So it's not about making it like, oh, it's machine learning for dummies. That's not what I'm recommending you do. I'm recommending that you focus on highlighting the point of value that is most intriguing and interesting to your reader, and then using very simple, everyday language to describe it. Always, I'm a big fan of swapping long words for shorter words. There's even a bunch of lists online about alternative swaps. Just switch those big words for shorter ones and focus on the single most important thing. And that will simplify your message. You don't have to kind of dumb it down.
Yeah. More questions. So Jeffrey is saying, sometimes jargons are what is considered as enterprise language by people on the B2B side. Is it okay incorporating it into your language if the jargon is normalized? Similar to the last question.
Look, I'm working right now training some like top global like software companies, and they're desperate to not sound like these enterprise dinosaurs. I don't think it's a fresh look. I think that day of where like, we're IBM, so screw you, you're going to buy us. Like those days are over. And I think the companies that are really winning are being more human, and they are talking more like regular people, and they're more accessible. And I believe that's the way forward. And so I don't think that just because you're an enterprise, you need to sound boring and use all these big words. I think the worst offenders are in enterprise. Look at Asana, right? Look at some of these companies that do Slack. They do great in the enterprise, and they don't, sound like some of these examples I shared. I don't think it's
the enterprise buyer, let's call him Bob. Bob, it's not like Bob goes to work and now he's B2B Bob and he wants to read jargon, and goes home, he's now B2C Bob, right? And now we're all same Bob always, right?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
B2B Bob.
And another thing is like, some jargon is like, this is the voice of the customer. If you do customer research and you see how your target buyer, the recipient of the message, is describing these things, yes, use industry terminology. That's fine. Sure. If it's, because that can be clear. If I'm talking about like A/B testing and multivariate testing and selling to people who use these tools, I don't need to explain what it is, right? I don't say like, so that's you don't need to dumb it down. Clarity, an industry phrase can be clear, right?
Totally. And if you are confident, my rule is if you are confident that your reader understands and cares and loves that word, then use it, like Pep said, right? But ask yourself that.
Emma, it was a pleasure to have you. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you.
Everybody,
Bye.
give Emma a follow on LinkedIn and Twitter. I'll see you later.